beautifuls. Welcome to Manna Reads. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. That would mean a lot to me. I am a booktuber. I mostly read Dead May on Thursdays, so hopefully if you stick around my channel, you can watch those videos. Today, however, though, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite authors of all time. Today we're going to talk about Jane Austen. So I'm going to go ahead and go through some of my favorite of her works. And if you've never read a Jane Austen novel, I definitely recommend her to you. She was her popularity, or she was around during the Regency period in England. And she wrote romance novels, basically, about kind of middle upper class people. I don't know, some of you probably do know her most famous works, which is like Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility. Those were, I guess, like her two of the bigger ones, but she's had so many novels. So I'm going to go through my favorites and talk a little bit about each one of them, and give a little synopsis. And and we're just going to go ahead and go through it. Please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing the channel with your friends. That would really mean a lot to me. All right, so we're just going to keep going. So, today, I have the Bible. But this is like the Bible to me. So this is Jane Austen Complete Works. I actually got this as a birthday present. I don't know when. It was a while ago. It was like for like a birthday. I don't remember which birthday. And so here is like the opening. It's a painting, or like a design, I guess. I'm not sure if it's a painting. Here is her picture. I'm trying to hold it up. Oh, where's the camera? Sorry. Oh, there we go. Oh, there we go. Okay, so you can kind of see right there. That's her. Sorry, sometimes I can't figure out where I'm pointing it, so there you go. Yeah. So this big giant anthology includes Sense and Sensibility, Persuasion, Pride and Prejudice, Emma, Mansfield Park, and Northanger Abbey. So it's so it got like most of her works, and then in the beginning, it kind of goes over like a little bit about her life. Over here, so she was basically born on December 16th, 1775, in Stevenson, Hampshire, England. I guess near Basingstoke. So she was the seventh child out of 8 children, and she was the second daughter. Her parents were Reverend George Austen, and he was a local rector of the Church of England. And Cassandra, I guess back in the day, you were part of the local gentry, or you were a common folk, or you were like nobility, or just like upper class. So I guess by today's standards, they would be middle class, because they weren't exactly poor, but they weren't exactly like in the upper echelons of their society. So they were just, I would consider, like middle class. And because he did have a job, like he did work, like most of the time in the upper nobilities, you didn't work, like you were just rich. Like that was your job. And I guess if you like got into like hobby, like politics and stuff, you could be like in the House of Lords, which is where, exactly what it sounds like. The House of Lords is where all the lords argued politics and stuff like that. And the House of Commons was for people who were also upper class, but they weren't nobility, so they didn't have titles. So I guess a good example of that would be Mr. Darcy. He was extremely rich. He's a character from Pride and Prejudice, but he didn't have a title, so he couldn't like debate in the House of Lords, but he could debate in the House of Commons if he wanted to have that job. Um, yeah, so that was that. Um, and then let's see here. So yeah, so that's what but that's what her dad did for a living. And she had a good education. She learned how to read, obviously, and she learned how to write. And the thing is that Jane Austen, I don't know if it's ironic. I think that's the wrong word. But like, what sets her apart, I guess, from most women in the period that she lived in, is that she actually never married. Even though all of her characters in her novels end up married. So, that's just not something that she did. But anyway, uh, so my favorite Jane Austen novel of all time is Pride and Prejudice. I extremely identify with Elizabeth Bennet. She's the middle sister. She's the most sensible one. She doesn't let her emotions get in the way of rational thinking, and she's the smart one, and she's her father's favorite, and she thinks her mother is just silly. She is a little silly. And she loves her eldest sister Jane, who's very like even tempered. She's very nice. She's very polite. She's, I guess, what people consider to be like the prettiest of the sisters. But so basically, with Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth and her sisters are all out, which basically means that they're all trying to get married. Because they have 5 girls in their family, and so it's pretty important that they all marry well, so that way they can, you know, have money. Because the whole thing in the novel in Pride and Prejudice is that if they don't get married, and if Mr. Bennet dies, then none of the girls can inherit the property. So it would go to their cousin, Mr. Collins, who's also a clergyman. And so, they're all, trying to find a good husband to settle down with. So while they're all out, and the two, Jane and Elizabeth, are, the ones that are, trying to hook up. Not really hook up, because you didn't hook up in Regency England. You danced and you went to parties and did all that good stuff, and then they would ask your father if they could marry you, and then that's how that happened. But so in the meantime, Jane falls in love with Mr. Bingley, who is also part of like the upper crust, but he's not exactly nobility, but he's still kind of considered, I guess, like a league way above her station. Like, so I guess like Jane and Elizabeth are expected to marry somebody like Mr. Collins, who's respectable, who has kind of like a decent income, but like it's not like he's not like in the upper echelons of like society. So, but Jane falls in love with Mr. Bingley, and and then they try to make that work. But then Elizabeth meets Mr. Darcy, who's very rigid. He's very tactured. He's like very like he says what he means. He's very blunt. So he's not exactly like, he doesn't really like polite society. He's not into that, but he still has to go. And so he meets Elizabeth Bennet at a party, and then like refuses, like he doesn't want to dance with her. And so like she's like, ugh, like, you know, she doesn't like him at first, and then she meets Mr. Wickham, who's part of the army. And so like she hits it off with him first. But lo and behold, Mr. Wickham is not exactly has the best character, but she doesn't know that at first, because at first he's like very charming and he says all the right things, and like he's very nice, and Mr. Darcy is just like very like stern. But there's things that happen in the novel, and I'm not sure if you've never read it. I don't want to spoil it for you. It's pretty old, but if you've seen any of the Masterpiece Theater versions, then you already kind of know how the story happens. But basically, one of her sisters ends up eloping with Mr. Wickham, and chaos ensues, because basically the worst thing that you could do as a young girl in Regency England is to have a scandal involving a man. You definitely didn't want to elope with somebody, because that will not only hurt you, that hurt your family, basically, and their reputation, because it's like, well, they didn't raise you right, so how could they raise your other family members right, especially the women? So it was a big deal. But that got squared away, and they all lived happily ever after, as per usual. So I fell in love with Pride and Prejudice. I think it was like one of my first Jane Austen novels, and it was just eye-opening. I loved Elizabeth. I loved the bond that she had with her sisters. I also have siblings, and we're close, but they have a special bond. So I definitely was like, oh, that's so nice, that they actually enjoy each other's company and like don't get sick of each other. Because imagine you're in a small house, or it's not a terribly large house, and you have to share everything. I can imagine that it could be very annoying. But they still have a very close bond, and they still love each other very much. And I really enjoyed that. So I would definitely, if you are interested, I would definitely read Pride and Prejudice, because it's a really good read. And she has a lot of insights to society, and what's different between men and women, but not really. And so she does. It's kind of hard to say if she's feminist or not, because it's like, yes, they all end up getting married. Like all her women end up, getting married to the right person. But I still think that it is sort of like pre-feminism, because, they are well written. They're not like one-sided. They're not just even like, just take Elizabeth Bennet, for example. Like, she's not one-sided. She's not really particularly looking for a husband. She just knows that she has to find one. But she doesn't particularly care if she does or not. And, she reads really well, and she talks to her dad a lot. She's very close. She's not particularly that girly. Like, just in, like, for example, if you compare her to Jane, Jane is really girly. She cares about her appearance a lot. She always wants to make sure that her look is on point. And Elizabeth is just like, whatever. Like, I have to do this because, that's what I've been told that I need to do. But she doesn't particularly want to do it. And then she does push back against Mr. Darcy a lot. Like, before they end up, finding common ground and like liking each other, they didn't really get along at all, and she just didn't care. Like, she was like, I don't care who you are, I don't care how rich you are, like, you don't treat people that way, you certainly don't treat me that way. So, I definitely enjoyed that. So, if you can kind of decide or debate whether or not she's a feminist, but I would say that she is. Just given the time period that she was writing into, like, women were still expected to marry and to like just do that. They weren't expected to have careers or anything. So she was just a product of living in 17th century England. So but if you look at it through that lens, then she's pretty, she's a pretty big feminist, I think. The next novel And my next favorite novel is Emma. There's been a lot of different versions of her novels that got adapted, of course. But my favorite adaptation is Clueless. I don't know if you were aware of this, but Clueless is actually based on Emma. So Emma is an upper class lady. She's actually part of the upper class. She's not middle class or anything. And she was like the first, like one of the only characters that was actually like upper class. But anyway, the story is about Emma, and she's kind of a busybody. Like she just goes around town, wants to know everybody's business, tries to be a matchmaker for everybody except herself. She has a childhood friend who kind of lives next door, that like she grew up with, and she kind of like looks up to. But you know she, she's trying to find partners for everybody else, and she doesn't really look to herself, or she's not very self-aware, that not everybody is the same, or not everybody wants to get married necessarily, or it needs her help to get married. And so she kind of has to learn the hard way that she should kind of like mind her own business. um and it's just the typical. I mean, she fails. She doesn't let that stop her from doing what she wants to do. She doesn't let that stop her from finding the right person for her, because she does fail, like she does. But she doesn't let that get her down too much. She just kind of realizes, like, oh, hey, like now I should look to myself, or for myself, and I should really worry about me and like not other people. And she's really like a very popular girl, and so everybody kind of takes her seriously, and like she hosts all the parties and stuff like that. So she's pretty well off, and and everybody looks to her, given that she is pretty well off. And so in Clueless, it kind of follows along the same route, where it's about a very popular, very rich girl. And she's all up in everybody's business. She wants to, have her friends be popular along with her. She falls for an older guy, and the guys are like, get over yourself. So, that's what happens. So she, but they, of course, they end up falling in love and getting married. Well, in the novel, because in Clueless, they didn't get married because she was like 16 or whatever. So in the movie, they don't get married, but they get together, I guess. So yeah, if you want to watch Emma, but you want a more like modern twist to it, then you can watch Clueless, and it's basically the same. Like they didn't actually change that much, to be honest. And the thing about Jane Austen novels is that she always has somebody who's the wrong person next to the person who's the right person. So she'll put like male characters in her book that are really, really flawed, but that look perfect on the surface. And then she'll put them next to the guys who are terrible, like on paper, like, when you meet them. And then, once you kind of get to know them, they're like, oh, this is the person I'm supposed to want to date. So it's like, or marry, because they don't date. There wasn't a lot of dating in 17th century marriage market. It's basically you met, you went to public parks, you had dinners, you went to, if there was the opera, you went to the opera, you went to theater, and then, they asked your father if they could marry you. That was pretty much it. There was not really dating. And then you were chaperoned the entire time. Like, it wasn't like you were by yourself. Like, you were never by yourself the entire time this was happening. You were always with your chaperone. Be it your mother, or be it, like, an aunt. But some older woman that was, like, constantly watching. Making sure, like, nothing terrible happened. But I guess, like, you could bribe them, right? Anyway. If I were me living in Regency England times, I would bribe them. I'd be like, hey, can you like go somewhere? I would like hand them a quid. I don't know how much a quid is. I'm sorry. I don't know. I'm not familiar with like London money. Anyway, that's Emma. Oh my god, I'm such a mess today. I'm sorry, guys. But anyway, we're having a good time, right? I'm assuming. I don't know. Yeah. So the other, novel is like a little less well known, but it's still really good. It's called Persuasion. So this novel centers around kind of a reunion. So the main female character, she actually is like considered a spinster because she didn't get married when she was an appropriate age. And like, I mean, appropriate age for the time was like 17, 18, like 20s, you were already kind of a little past your prime. And if you were 30 and you never married, then you were just a spinster. It's just how it was back then. Anyway, so she was already a little bit past her prime, but she did have someone that she was in love with, but he wasn't. But basically, her father said no to the match because he didn't have money. Like, he didn't have any money. So he said, no, you can't marry my daughter because you don't have any money. And so she kind of stayed single for the rest of her life. I know it's sad, right? But no, actually, that's not what happened. So he comes back years later, I think 8 years later. And he's now a very richer than they are, actually, because now they've fallen a little bit on hard times. But now he's rich. He works as like a merchant company. But anyway, he's super rich now. And so he comes back and he's like, hey, I'm super rich now. And so they kind of start courting each other again after like 8 years where she's like, I can't marry you because my father said no. And so they get courted. So he courts her again, and they get married. Jane Austen novels, there's only one ending, and that's marriage. But in the meantime, she has to deal with kind of society stigma of her not being married and her dealing with her parents, still kind of having to do what they say. She's not really independent. She has her own independent thoughts, and she really, is still in love with the captain. But, she can't really do anything about it until he comes back and until he, like, proves that he has money and he can take care of her. So that's what happened. It's a really good novel. It's a lesser known one of her works, but it's still really good. I'm always going to recommend Jane Austen novels. Like I said, she's one of my favorite authors of all time. I really enjoy her work. I really love her novels, and she just writes her female characters really well. Like, that's another thing too, I think I've mentioned already. But I really love the way that she was able to write really strong female characters for the time period. And she gave them a voice, basically, especially during the time when women didn't have a lot of voices. Like, there was still a lot of things women couldn't do by themselves. And so she put women in the forefront. Like, her main characters were all women. And so she gave them a voice and they didn't have one. And so I think that that's still commendable. And her novels are still pretty prevalent. I mean, they're still relevant. I mean, some of the things are a little outdated, but some of her thoughts of the characters aren't. They all want to be, they all want to live good lives. They all want to, do right by their families. They all want to be happy, and that's pretty universal. Like, I don't think you have to live in 17th century England to want that for yourself. So it's pretty, I just enjoy her characters a lot. And the other one is, my other favorite novel is Sense and Sensibility. So that novel starts with their father dying, actually. So there's two sisters, and their father has just died. And so basically, they get kicked out of their home. So they did have money. They were very well off. But because they didn't get married quick enough, or so they get so the family home gets inherited by their cousin, I believe. And so they get kicked out. And so they move into like a small house, and they have kind of have to learn how to do everything by themselves. You know, they learn how to cook, they learn how to navigate, the seaside, because they live in a seaside community, I guess. But they learned how to, basically do the things for themselves. They learn how to sew. They learn how to cook. Though they don't have any servants anymore, so it's just them trying to figure out like how to do things, basically. So there's a lot of funny moments that happen because they never had to, basically. But anyway, so the sister. So the reason why it's called Sense and Sensibility is because like I said, it's based on two sisters. But one of the sisters is very sensible. Like, she doesn't give in to her emotions. She kind of like sees things very logically, and with reason. And then the other sister is like the complete opposite. She's very emotional. She thinks with her heart first and asks questions later. She doesn't really, think about things too much ahead. And so they're very different personalities. And so the younger sister gets kind of embroiled into a little scandal because she falls in love with kind of like a rakish guy. And so so there's a little scandal that happens. And so they kind of have to navigate through that. And her sister, is also affected because, like, in her previous, like I mentioned previously, if you had a scandal, it would not only reflect on you, but it would reflect on your whole family, especially if you had sisters. So they would basically become like unmeritable. But anyway, so they kind of navigate through that scandal. And so there's an older gentleman who kind of falls in love with the younger sister. He is very. There's a theme with all her male leads that are like Mr. Right. They're all very taciturn and all very kind of formal in their mannerisms. Like, they don't have too much colorful personalities. But I think that she does that on purpose. I'm pretty sure that she did that on purpose because she wanted to show a contrast between the charismatic, fun-loving dudes and then the more like serious, like husband material, basically, because you have to have a contrast between like how we like if you can't like if there's no rakes, like how are you going to compare to like the husbands? I really think that Jane Austen had a version of like fuck boys and then the husband. So you had you could have a little fun with the with the Mr. Wickhams and all of those ilks, but then you had to seriously get serious and marry a Mr. Darcy. But like if you notice that I'm mentioning Mr. Darcy a lot, it's because he's my favorite. He's my favorite of all of the Jane Austen like romantic leads. Oh my god. And like my favorite Mr. Darcy is Colin Firth. He's older now. But back when I saw the first ad, well, not the first, because there's, like I said, there's been many, but when I saw the one from PBS and I saw Colin Firth for the first time, oh man, that was, especially like there's a scene that they always do where they're in a fountain, like he's swimming. And so she comes and she's just walking around the grounds of his house called Pemberley. And so like he, so he's still swimming or whatever, but he's, and he's swimming with a full shirt on. Like it wasn't like he took off his shirt or anything. He had a full linen shirt swimming. But anyway, and so he gets up out of the water and it's like, the dripping water scene and his shirt is sticking to him, which is very inappropriate. And so it's just like supposed to be like, oh, like the hottest scene. I mean, it is actually. If you've never seen it, do yourself a favor and just YouTube, just like go on YouTube and go on like Mr. Darcy fountain scene or Mr. Darcy swimming scene. Chef's kiss. Like you're never gonna get over it. Anyway, and it's brilliant in any adaptation I've ever seen. So just type that in. Do yourselves a favor, for Friday evening, and go watch that. Anyway, after my video though, like not before. Yeah. So I got lost and I got lost. Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So they all have that theme where it's just like I'm like husband material, but you don't know that yet because you're being bamboozled by the charismatic man child, and you have to kind of figure it out. You kind of have to piece them together, and then figure out like, oh, this is the person that I'm supposed to marry. Like this is the guy. Yeah, but they're all pretty much like that. And there's always a guy in a Jane Austen novel that's like really the bad boy and like is not loyal or faithful or, very responsible. And then you have the really responsible, really great catch men that look like they just don't know how to have fun. And you just gotta have to figure that out, that they're actually the ones that you need to marry. But yeah, the reason why I enjoy Jane Austen novels so much is just because they're fun reads. Like, they're fun romance novels. They're not that serious. They make a lot of good social points, even today. And just like, they don't write men the way that Jane Austen writes men. Like real men, where they're like gentlemanly. They do everything for the female lead, and they're just very passionate individuals, but you kind of have to like get under the layers of that passion to find it. And so, if you're not bored on a Friday, or if you don't know what to do, or you're still in pandemic land like the rest of us, definitely pick up a Jane Austen novel, because it's a fun read and you're gonna have a good time. There's never been a Jane Austen novel that I've regretted reading. So, you can take that however you will. It's just my opinion. But yeah. So I would, as a recommendation, because this is my favorite novel of all time, and I wouldn't tell you something that was bad, I would think, is Pride and Prejudice. Definitely, if you think of no other novel to read, pick up Pride and Prejudice. It's a great read. In all the adaptations, PBS does really, public, it's channel 28 for me, but PBS is like the supreme. They do Masterpiece Theater. They have all her adaptations. I think though you have to pay to watch them, but I think Pride and Prejudice and Emma are on Amazon Prime, so if you have Amazon Prime you can watch them, and they're really good miniseries. And they have, cute actors, so what can be wrong with that? And they have pretty dresses. I enjoy dress up, obviously. Yeah, so definitely pick that up. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you had a good time listening to me ramble on about Jane Austen, but I love her. I always will love her. And feel free to subscribe and share. Leave me a comment to let me know which one is your favorite Jane Austen novel. If you've never read a Jane Austen novel, which one would you consider reading? And also join my Patreon. It's on the screen right now. I have perks to give out to you, so I do shout out if you become my patron, and thank you for being my patron. I also will provide you with recommended reading lists, just personalized just for you. And I am testing something out that would maybe include like a watch party of, certain episodes or series, but I'm testing that out now, so I'll let you know when that becomes available for you. And, either you can buy me a coffee. That would, also really help the channel. I'm trying to get a new office chair so that way I could be comfortable. And yeah, that would really help a lot. So you can use my Amazon links if you want to buy any of the novels. I will link them all in the description box below. And if you use my affiliate link on Amazon, I do get a little portion of it. I also have a Volley. Volley is between like WhatsApp and Discord. You can send private messages there, video, text. You can send photos there. It's really easy to use. It's very intuitive. You can join my Volley, and then I also get a little money off of that too. So just a couple ways you can support the channel and support my content. I hope you all have a good Friday and a good rest of your weekend. We'll see. Oh, one more thing before I go. I am having a live stream on Saturday, this Saturday. I'm going to hold it from 12 to 1 p.m. So it's a little hour. It's an hour after. So that's 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So we're going to be playing Dream Daddy that day. So look out for that. I will, I will just update that as I, schedule that. But yeah, hopefully you can join me this Saturday so we can play Dream Daddy and talk about BM. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Bye.